First thing we're going to open up is I want that trophy.
Yeah, it's on my side.
Over there. The one that says winner
Yeah.
on it. It's awesome. You rent these studios and you have all this stuff in the background, but you never really take a look at it. And I just looked up and noticed that, and it's cracking me up.
You have some sort of dead stormtrooper.
No, that one's fine. That's like a cause thing. I know that. But the trophy that says winner, where it's not to anybody. Somebody went to a trophy
Or of
store.
anything,
Yeah, somebody went to a trophy store and was like, I need to get a trophy. What do you, like, whose name do you want on it? Winner.
Just generally winner.
Yeah, when I hand these out to anonymous people, winner.
Yeah.
Our B-roll is always going to be so much fun. I was telling you right before we started, I'm going to start this with a story. Because you always show up to these rocking out nice. You have a button-down shirt, you have a vest, you're always dressed well, you present well. I rock up in street clothes.
You're the creative.
I hate that excuse. About 10 years ago, myself and friends started a design studio in Amsterdam. The first day we went to register. Now, to register in the Netherlands, you go to a notary. And coming from the US, a notary is like at the post office. Not really a big deal. Sort of anybody can apply to be a notary. In Netherlands, a notary is a very high-end job. This is like a high-end lawyer. Now, I had no clue about this. We go to incorporate our company. I'm the person who's supposed to be leading the company. I rock up, just coming from the gym. I don't think I had showered. I had a bright blue Adidas tracksuit. I think I had biked through the rain. I had long hair, so it's like matted to my head. I'm sweating. I'm unshaved for a week. And I rock up with this like oversized blue Adidas tracksuit, walk into the office. All the my other co-founders are there, dressed like very presentable, very nice. And they're all looking at me. And we sit down at this table. We have all these documents in front of us. And they're like, okay, who's the main person running the company? And they point to me. And you could just see the notary's face do this, man, you guys are fucked. Like, there ain't no way you're doing anything good coming out of this. And luckily we did go on to become a multi-million-dollar company. But I can say in that one day, absolutely nobody had faith in me or nobody had faith in any of us based on me rocking up like that. 10 years later, I have not learned my lesson and I still rock up in street clothes while everybody around me seems to rock up in much nicer outfits.
No, but I've seen you in nice suits, so that's
I have them, and I do enjoy wearing suits when I don't necessarily need to, when it just shows off a little bit more effort. I just thought that was funny where for me, it's always been more comfortable and what makes me comfortable so I can think the best. And for these conversations, I usually try to have my thinking hat on. Dunbar, we are back this week with episode, I think 4.
Possibly,
I don't really know, but in my folder count and what I'm calling it, episode 4. And this week, we're going to talk about agents. We get to go through a bunch of different topics before we get into the podcast studio, what we want to talk about. This seemed like a fun one.
Yeah.
And the way that I'll kick this off, and then I'll kick it over to you, is a personal pet peeve of mine, but now it has come to be true. For the longest time, we were talking about this today, in your 29-year career, in my 24-year career, I have been annoyed consistently with UX designers that say, I design for humans. Because I'm like, who else are you designing for? Like everybody, oh no, engineers don't design for, they're designing for themselves or like Jesus. Everybody designs for humans. Nobody designs for animals or dogs. So that always annoyed me until now, because now we need to think about designing for humans and for agents. That's where we can start.
Yeah, okay, it's a good start. And let me start by saying this is nothing new. We've been designing for agents, for bots for years.
Okay, you bring up a really good point, which is already another one of my pet peeves, which is like agents are basically bots, but now we have Gen AI capabilities and context stores and RAG layers that we can build into the memory, essentially, that we can build in, and they can do more automated tasks because of Gen AI. But yeah, it's a new marketing term for a fancier bot that has some additional capability in my mind. Yeah, that's how I think about it.
And I think you're right. I think that part of the problem with this sort of advent of AI now is everybody's putting fancy labels on things that actually we've been doing for a long time. There's a few novel things in there that are genuinely advancing, some of them more than others. But I think if you think about the fact we've been designing for search bots for years, 20 years or more, that we've always designed with these things in mind. And things like Google and their search algorithm have directly influenced how we design sites and how we design information presented on sites in order to get higher search ranking. We're hopefully old hands at this.
This is something from a user experience point of view. So many people go in and look at websites and they look at what's the layout, how do people move through this site, what's the information architecture. Rarely, though, do I hear user experience designers start with what's the content that we need to present on the site, which I think is always the logical place to start.
100%.
Everything starts with the content strategy, right? What is the story that you're conveying, and how do you build that out through hierarchy, through visualization, through organization of content, through tagging of that content. It's always surprised me that UX designers seem to jump into wireframes before we can often get to the content. That's not everybody, right? I'm making a blanket statement, but it is one thing that I hope with agents a little bit more, with Gen AI, people start thinking about that content just a little bit more. Content is going to drive all interfaces much stronger from this point.
That's a really smart perspective. And actually, I think it's a genuinely welcome one at the moment. So if you think about the fact that I remember going back in the day and saying content is king, and we knew these truths, we knew these directions, that content should be behind everything. And yet, I would say the last year, 2 years, I think probably the industry that's felt under the biggest threat at the moment is around the copywriters who've seen things like ChatGPT, which can just vomit out content that sort of looks all right. But actually, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. They're actually well-designed content, and doing it first before you do any visual design, any information architecture, doing content design first, and how you actually target your audience, whether it's human, whether it's bots, and we can come back to that.
Yeah.
I think that is absolutely where we'll go, because I think about the genuinely game-changing industry pivoting solutions that I've been involved in over the years, and 100% content strategy has been at the heart of that. And I think about the solutions which have been good, but maybe haven't moved the needle very much, and content strategy has been downplayed. So,
one of the most harmful things in the history of UX, I have to think, is lorem ipsum, right? And I'm breaking the fourth wall. I'm talking to designers out there. If you are still using lorem ipsum, it drives me bonkers. Designers will say, yeah, but I don't write the copy. If you take away the copy from any interface, you don't have an interface. No. And it is shocking to me how much designers will just push that off. Oh, that's content. That's a copy thing. Yeah. I understand that these are different disciplines. I understand that designers may not have the best, let's say, comprehension of how words need to be crafted in order to convey a message. That being said, you can still look at what you're doing for content and think about, what do I want to do here? You come into any interface, into any website, into any application, any page that you are on, easy questions. What do I need to do on this page? What do I need to do next? What's the next best action? If you have lorem ipsum in there, you cannot figure that out. And like in what you just said, where you can use Gen AI, and now I feel like you should be able to use agents to plug this stuff in just by default. You should have a stance. There should never be a reason for you to have lorem ipsum, especially at this point, when you can generate your first draft for free easily.
It's usually telling of the fact that the copy has come from a content strategy which either hasn't been very well defined up front, or the content itself, the copywriting, has been done a bit late in the game. So I think it gets even more painful when you start to think about the fact that A, we've known this for 20, 30 years, and B, we're even more international and globally designing now. So when you start to think about different languages, and I remember the painful days of being a developer coding for English and German and Japanese and Russian and Arabic, and each one of those have got their different nuances that you need to bear in mind for when you're building sites. If you design these up front and start this desperate rushing to get something out quickly, there's no doubt in my mind that you get better crafted solutions.
You were mentioning at the beginning, agents are just bots, and bots we've been designing for, because and this is how we got into the content, a side conversation. When you come into a website, obviously the content that you have there, it will be designed against SEO. You want it to be found. Yeah. Now we come back to the agent conversation where we started this. How do you think companies should progress in terms of thinking about a human strategy,
Yeah.
which would have legible content, which would have story, which would have emotion, which would have brand. And then do you think companies are going to need to have an agent specific interface or strategy? And let me nuance this for a moment. On the human side, we've always built that together, right? It's the human side built with SEO. I'm curious, are we going to see that divorced? Are we going to see the need for two content strategies?
Yeah, that's interesting. I might be wrong on this. My initial thought is it's like the approach we've always taken with style sheets, where you put together a way of transforming information for somebody who's accessing a browser, somebody who can see, versus somebody who might be using a screen reader and is accessing it through a slightly different way of accessing the same information. It's the same information, but it's transformed according to the consumer of that information. I think we'll probably see the advent of a style sheet equivalent, which is transforming the information prepared specifically for specific agents. So certain agents which are identified to fit within a certain digital ecosystem and are probably formatted according to agreed and accepted criteria.
What you just said is so simple, and it's hilarious that I just hadn't thought about that. The way that I was going about thinking about it, and what you just said. So you take it from a style sheet perspective, and I start with the same sort of base content, and then that gets processed through a middle layer, like through a style sheet, and then it comes out the other end based on whether I'm human, agent, and it could be a variation of human based on language or whatever, where I am, location, what it knows about me. I had been thinking about this like advanced API design, that I still have my human side, and there is a whole structure of how you go about doing API design. That's how I had been thinking about doing design for agents at the moment, which is very different from what you said, because that is two different streams. That is literally, I have to think about how someone is going to connect to this and how they are pulling information, what that information is, how it is presented, parsed, how it is communicated. What you said, though, is very different in terms of starting out with everything and then just molding it to an endpoint through a middle layer. And I hadn't thought about that, so I really like that.
I might be wrong, though, but I'll tell you why I say that is because I think ultimately we need to be able to chop and change between whether it's a bot-driven initiator of a conversation, whether a human picks up halfway through a journey and maybe hands it back to a bot. I think we're going to get situations where we do blend a little bit between actually my personal shopping agent, go and do my shopping for me, and I go and see what it's doing. Actually, I want to step in, change that milk to low-fat milk. Things like this, things like easy ways that we can influence and take control when we want to, and then pass the reins back, means that I think you want to try and keep to a single set of user journeys, whether that user is human or robotic.
You brought up something interesting. For some, there are different types of agents, right? Now, yes. I think of this as different types of code that can go and do things autonomously based on a set of instructions that you give it. Pretty simple, right? With different types of agents, does that mean that there will be different strategies to design against those agents? For example, an agent that is purely a piece of code that is about retrieving information. Yeah. No human in the loop, is just retrieving information. Maybe it's the weather. I don't know. That's an easy one. Yeah. So it's going to go out there, get a piece of information that is actual from a central location, pull that. Then there are, as you said, agents that do tasks that may need some sort of course correction. It is not so much a defined task, like a grocery list. Yeah. Where based on what it knows that's in my refrigerator or what I tell it or allowing me to be in the loop, it might change. I have to wonder if by saying agents, we're already cutting off the proper way to design. Because if I think about those two different types of agents, one that just goes and collects information versus one that needs to keep a human in the loop and one that has more of a subjective view of what their goal is, or quote unquote subjective. Is there a multitude of ways to design for these? And you would say as a designer, the first thing I need to do is understand what types of agents may be interfacing with my system, and that will set the strategy. Yeah.
So I like to think of agents as subroutines. So I think agents is a fancy term.
Makes sense.
But ultimately they're little, some of them bigger than others, but they're little programs which set out to achieve a certain objective. And there's a nice analogy to composable architecture where you bolt these things together like Lego, and through the result of connecting these different agents, you get an end output which hopefully matches what you set out to achieve. So I think it gets interesting when you think about how do you measure success of the agents. And I've been reading a little bit more into sort of how Q-learning works and how neural networks work. And I think there is something in there around sort of customer or user satisfaction, particularly when it comes to direct-to-consumer applications. So when you think about the Q value being hot or cold, and depending on have I achieved satisfaction by taking these actions, my shopping's a great example. So if I order this set of shopping, my user comes back and gives me a score of 80%, I want to try and improve that to 90%, 100%. And I start changing the shopping list based on what I know, what they're trying to achieve, based on, I don't know, their nutritional guidance, or based on their preferred brands, or based on the quantities. And it learns, this is how a neural network works, it learns over time that what weighting it gives to different decisions achieves higher satisfaction ratings. I've now lost the question that we started with, but
Which one? We've been through so many now.
But I'm thinking that satisfaction thing is probably how you measure success of these. So when we talk about designing for bots versus humans, I think there's probably direct to consumer still at the moment. I think there's probably at least a few key points you're going to want to say, I'm going to do this, yes or no. You can just, it will default to I will go ahead. If you don't stop me, if you don't review it, I'll go ahead. But at that point you say, no, I want to have a look at what you're doing. I want to check that shopping list. You need to be able to drop back to a human-oriented user journey, because otherwise you've got to completely redesign everything.
I'll riff off what you just said there with the human and the agent side. And this is where I'll go back to where we started at the beginning, my story of I was always annoyed by UX designers who would say, I design for humans. When companies define an agent strategy, I tend to think by using the term agent, we are allowing the technology to lead. And that term agent is by default a red herring. It will cause problems because it is not an agent strategy that you are developing. It is still a human strategy. And these agents, or again, bits of code, as you said, like subroutines that go out and do something, need to align with the job to be done.
Yeah.
That I think is still one of the issues, as we've talked in the last few weeks, of Gen AI can do that, and it's all about Gen AI, and it's all about AI, and now it's about agents. Everything is leading with the technology versus if I back up and I say, what does a company need to do? Oh, you're looking at doing these 5 jobs to be done, or these 5 use cases for a human. What types of agents or subroutines support this goal? With that, you are getting away from this idea of just quote unquote agent, which I think is a blanket term, which isn't going to help anybody.
Yeah.
That's like internet helps. Yeah, it does. What are you using it for? If companies want to design a good agent strategy, it needs to start with the human strategy first. There's your soundbite.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need to keep coming back to the idea of we've got this desperate desire, as you say, through technology to automate and replace human effort. And I think we need to focus on the fact that actually it's more valuable for us to augment human effort, make it easier for people to do things rather than replace people in doing things. I've been using Manus a little bit recently, which is essentially an agent that allows you to build things. And I think my initial takeaway after getting very excited about what it could do just from a natural language prompt, saying I'd done things like create a video conferencing tool for me for 4 people, which I just created Skype in 20 minutes. And this was after Skype got launched. Yeah, basically. So I needed something else.
Sunset is the nice word.
And it created something that looked like it would do what I wanted it to do. And I've done a couple of other things with it as well. But it had problems. And I can't help feeling that I've seen so many posts recently on LinkedIn and other social media about everybody's getting very excited about what Gen AI can do, what these agents can do. But then people are starting to question how much of the code that it's creating is actually going to get put into production, actually going to make it live, and how much needs to be pulled apart and rewritten. And what I came away with, the takeaway was that actually it feels a bit like the singularity is here, that we've got these machines which can do whatever we want and do them fast, so we don't actually know what's going on behind the hood, but actually it's a bit crap. And what they put out is full of errors and full of redundant code and needs drastic overhauling. And it's very good for throwaway gimmicky stuff till you look at it and go, wow, it's done this. Until you start to use it, engage with it and go, yeah, okay, it's almost there, but I'm going to have to redo it. And the effort of redoing it would probably be quicker to build it in the first place.
What this reminds me of, the year 2000, I was in university. Dreamweaver comes out.
Yeah, okay.
It was the revolution of the WYSIWYG editors. For those of you who don't know the term
not
WYSIWYG, what is what you get. WYSIWYG editors come out. It was the death of the web designer.
I hated Dreamweaver.
No, and yes, everybody who used it, this was the initial idea. It was the death of the web designer because now I could go in, I could just design things like I was working in, at that time, Illustrator or Photoshop, and it would spit out production ready code. It was never production ready. In the past, let's say several weeks, several months, as I've been screwing around with these tools more or essentially watching a lot more videos on YouTube, it still strikes me that yes, you can build a working application with Claude, you can do it with ChatGPT, Manus, Devin, there's a bunch of tools out
Lovable.
there.
Yep.
Yeah, oh yeah, Lovable, yeah, great one. It doesn't seem to produce what you need, and you can't get there without being a bit of an engineer.
Yes.
I still, like, when I watch videos on YouTube, I still see people going through the code and explaining the code, talking about pulling in libraries, talking about changing things. It didn't do this correct. I needed to comment this out to figure out where the bug was. These are things that I expect from an engineer. Will GenAI get there eventually where I can just type something in English and have this whole thing of English is the new programming language? Yes, it eventually will.
Yeah.
Will that be good code in the end? I don't know. Does it matter? I'm not sure. Do we still need computer scientists? Hell yes. I do not understand this whole thing of the death of the engineer, the death of the UX designer. These things I feel are going to become more important, but we've talked about this before, just for a niche. So that niche of who is really great UX designers or really great engineers may narrow. The shallow end of the pool may fill out with people who are working in Devin and Manus and all of this. And in the same way, Dreamweaver did that. In the same way, Squarespace did that. In the same way, what was GeoCities did that. But whoa, 90s. In the same way, all of these things have done it before. All it's done is democratized digital properties. It has allowed more people to come on and use it. It has not reduced the need for really smart engineers, content people, UX professionals, whatever that is to build digital experiences. It has not reduced the need. It has increased the width at which people can work, that democratization commodity, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And it starts to make you think about what makes these people good engineers or good designers. And for me, I think it's about the ability to have a vision, to know where you're going, and the ability to think laterally across a number of disciplines, a number of topics, so to create genuinely interesting solutions. The craft that then allows you to execute, and we've talked about this before, that craft has suddenly become a much lower barrier of entry. And that has to be a good thing, but it does make you think about if you want to excel in this space, given you've suddenly got 1,000 more people who can compete against you that maybe couldn't have done 5 years ago, how will you stand out? How will you be able to lift yourself and your ideas above the crowd? And it makes, hopefully, for better craftspeople. So I think it's genuinely a good thing for the industry.
I feel like all the concern is a little bit misplaced. Even with agents, when I see agents built, when I see people building custom agents to build websites, there is still a level of knowledge that is needed. But again, you can build that sort of ad nauseum as much as you want. You get your infinite output. It's just the depth of what's being produced. So maybe the better way to say it, the sort of shallow experiences on the web will continue to proliferate and widen, but the really hardcore ecosystems of great products or services, of data usage, whether that's health, whether that's travel, whether that's finance, you're going to need really complex ecosystems. And this is going to be great applications, products. This is going to be whole sets of agents that will be doing things for you, right? Whether you, again, whether you want to say microservices or anything else, the complexity in there, I don't think you're going to get just by speaking it into existence. You're going to have to know a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'll give you the last word because we're going to wrap up. We started with agents. We went everywhere, but I think it was an enjoyable conversation. But give me the last word on agents.
I think it's worth talking about how you can use things like generative AI to create solutions effectively. And I'm coming down more and more to the idea, rather than trying to do the Manus thing of say, I'll give you a couple of sentences, now create my all-singing, all-dancing tool for me. that actually it makes sense to think of it like Lego in tiny little blocks. Define what those blocks are and constrain your agent, your AI, to create those blocks for you and then connect them yourself individually. Because by doing that, I think you retain control, you retain your understanding, more importantly, of what each block does. And you can design that whole architecture, whether it's a visual architecture, whether it's a technical architecture, you can design it up front and how it connects together. So you keep control of the end output. If you don't do that, you're devolving that design to an AI, which, as we've spoken before, is just averaging out everything that it's got to pull on for its design.
What excites me about that as a user experience person, obviously for users, it would give me a little bit more choice on what I can do within an application. I can customize that application a little bit more to what I want and what I'm doing. And that makes me fairly excited for what we can build in the future. Dunbar, week's done. We won't catch up again next weekend. I'm out of town, but I will see you the week after.
Sounds good. It's always good to talk.